Good evening. I'm Steve Edwards, the Executive Director of the Institute of Politics, and it's my great pleasure on behalf of the IOP to welcome all of you here to International House tonight for our conversation exploring the future of the Republican Party. This conversation is part of two series, part of International House's Global Voices series, and we always are so appreciative of the collaboration and partnership and hospitality that the entire iHouse community provides to us here. It's also part of a series that we are embarking on throughout winter quarter here on campus that seeks to explore the Trump presidency and its impact on politics, on policy, on culture and in media. It's called America in the Trump Era. Some of you have been to a number of those series. I should mention that we have another conversation that is parallel to this one that will be scheduled for Monday, February 27th, exploring the future of the Democratic Party. And so we think about these two conversations. It's interesting to note that, throughout the campaign, so many analysts and pundits were predicting the collapse of the Republican Party, and here we sit now in February with arguably the Republican Party enjoying greater dominance than any other time in its history. If you think about not only controlling the White House and both houses of Congress, but also if you look at 2/3 of state governorships, 2/3 of state legislatures, at all of the local levels of government in many parts of the country. And yet that station in which it finds itself also masks many deep divisions that still exist within Congress and with other aspects of the party. So tonight's panel is going to explore those divisions in great detail and try and understand how all of that maps against a Trump presidency as we go forward. As we do, we will open up the floor to questions tonight. We will put a microphone in the middle of the audience, and we ask that we reserve the first 3 questions for students and then the rest for anybody who wants to pose a question tonight. We ask that you, in fact, pose a question, that it ends with a question mark, and you keep your question short and to the point so we can get to as many of you as possible. Now is also a good time to remind you to make sure your cell phones are on silent. So we thought it was fitting to turn the microphone over formally, since we're talking about the future of the Republican Party, to one of the students here as part of that future. He's the head of the college Republicans on campus. His name is Matthew Foldy. He's a 3rd year in the college. So please join me in welcoming Matthew to the stage to introduce our panel. Matthew.
After a historic election, many have wondered what lies in store for politics and our country as a whole. Tonight, we're going to focus on what lies in store for the Republican Party in the years ahead, and we couldn't have a better panel with whom to discuss this topic. Bill Kristol is one of the most prominent neoconservatives in America and is the founder of the Weekly Standard. He also hosts his own version of the Axe Files, Conversations with Bill Kristol. He's gone toe-to-toe with everyone from Bret Baier to Stephen Colbert. Mr. Kristol is also a member of the IOP's Board of Advisors. Congressman Jack Kingston was the first Republican elected to represent Georgia's 1st congressional district since the end of Reconstruction, and he served in Congress for over 2 decades. Since leaving office, he has worked with the Georgia Republican Party as the chairman of the Georgia Republican Party Foundation and was a senior advisor and spokesman for Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Congressman Vin Weber represented Minnesota in Congress for 12 years, where he was one of the architects of the Republican takeover of the House in 1994. He has also served as a key advisor for the presidential campaigns of Bob Dole, George Bush, and Mitt Romney. He is also the chairman of the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a nonprofit that supports building the infrastructure for democracy in countries around the world. Congressman Weber was also a fellow at the IOP in 2013. Moderating tonight's discussion is IOP visiting fellow Robert Costa, a journalist at the Washington Post. If you followed along with the government shutdown of 2013, you probably heard Ted Cruz read Green Eggs and Ham, and you read Costa's coverage, for which he earned the title the Golden Boy of the government shutdown. During the 2016 election, Costa sat down with now President Trump several times for several interviews. Since President Trump's inauguration, Costa has dedicated much of his reporting to covering Congress. And with that, I'm excited to present tonight's discussion on the future of the Republican Party. Please join me in welcoming our all-star panel.
Do we have a proposed seat?
Thanks very much for the introduction. It's great to be here at the University of Chicago. It's been a wonderful few days of classes and discussions and seminars, and this is kind of the finale of my week here. I really appreciate everyone coming out tonight, and especially to my panelists here to discuss the future of the Republican Party. We're talking about a party that now controls the Senate, controls the House, controls the White House. And I was thinking about the topic of the future of the Republican Party, a party I've covered for a few years. And I thought about President Trump, someone who came into office without much of an ideology, without much grounding in the Republican Party. And every day in the White House, President Trump, based on my reporting, confronts different orbits of influence around him. He has Steve Bannon, his chief strategist, and Stephen Miller, the senior policy advisor. They're the populists and nationalists in the White House, who represent that Breitbart strain of the Republican Party, more non-interventionist approach on foreign policy. They're in his ear, and he's dealing with them every day. Then there are the mainstream Republicans. Reince Priebus, the chief of staff, Sean Spicer, the press secretary, come out of the country club wing of the party. They have different kinds of views and more moderate on immigration and other issues. Then you have the conservative movement with Vice President Mike Pence and other policy advisors who really come out of the movement right with Ronald Reagan. And then you have the more Wall Street wing, Gary Cohn, the economic advisor, Jared Kushner, the son-in-law, almost Democrat in some of their instincts and political plans. And these spheres, they sometimes intersect, sometimes they don't. But Trump is having, as someone who is thinking about the Republican future himself, has to choose between all these different options. And in the first month, we don't really see the president going in a strong direction in any particular way. Sure, the executive orders seem to be more populist, Bannon in their style and in their policy. But just like Trump has to choose between these different options in terms of the future of the Republican Party, what the Republican Party means now, so does the party itself. They face those same orbits, the same history, the same options for the future. And so I wanted to start off on one newsy topic, which is Russia, which comes to the heart of what the Republican Party is going to mean and be on foreign policy. And I wanted to go to Congressman Kingston. You've been a senior advisor to the Trump campaign. You went to Russia in December. You've spoken publicly about maybe not having the sanctions anymore on Russia. And so long as Bill and others have said there should maybe be a more hawkish consensus out there for the Republican Party. Is that changing, that hawkish view of the world, and especially the traditional Republican view on Russia, and why?
Well, first of all, it's a great honor to be here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me or allowing me to come. Those of you who invited me, maybe we better hold a vote on that afterwards, if that was a good idea or not. But, in terms of the Republican Party and foreign policy, if you take a step back, the authenticity of two candidates in a very crowded presidential field, Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, both who were very skeptical of our results in the Middle East. And if you think about George Bush running as we can't do nation building, and yet what did he turn around and fail at doing was nation building. And I think that the maybe rank and file, and if you will, the Reagan strand, the non-country club group of maybe more working people Republicans are very skeptical of what we have done in the Middle East, particularly. We're still in Afghanistan. Does anybody say that was a total success? We're still in Iraq. Lord knows what happened in Libya. We just destroyed the government and then shrugged our shoulders and walked off. That wasn't necessarily Republican, obviously, but the truth of the matter is, if you look at where Sanders and Trump appealed to many, many voters, was look at what's happened in the Middle East. Look what's happened to our foreign policy and our loss of stature. When the president of the Philippines calls the president of the United States the son of a prostitute, I'm cleaning it up, you got somewhat of a problem. Or when China forces the president of the United States to get off the back of the airplane, you have a loss of status and prestige. And I think what many of the Trump voters are saying is, don't know what we're doing in foreign policy, don't want to encourage you to do more of it.
What about on Russia? Just a quick
And so circling back, having relayed that, on Russia, I think the opportunity to have a new relationship there, as any administration has always tried to do. Remember, George Bush said, I looked into the soul of Putin. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, the famous reset. I think Trump wanted to try to start out anew with Russia. I don't think it's possible anymore. But to look at the sanctions, remember there were two. There was the presidential sanctions that came on in December post-election, and then there were some that are on law by statute, congressionally pushed. But to look at those sanctions and to say, did they give us the results that we wanted? Did Russia come out of Crimea? Did Russia quit supplying arms to the Assad regime in Syria? They did not. So were the sanctions a success? I don't see how you can argue that they were. The question might be, do you double down on them? Do you expand upon them? Or do you just say, to Putin, we're going to drop them. In exchange, we want you out of Crimea. Maybe that's a stretch. Or in exchange, we want you to help us defeat ISIS in Syria. It could be a bargaining chip at the table. That's what I would suggest.
Bill, Congressman Kingston's talking about there's maybe this grassroots, non-interventionist impulse within the Republican base. But when I'm roaming the halls of Congress, I don't always sense that the elected officials in Congress right now are moving in that direction. Is your sense that the party is truly moving away from its traditional views on Russia and foreign policy?
Let me first just say also, I'm happy to be back at the University of Chicago. I feel I have a long connection with it, though I didn't go here because my mother got her PhD in history from this university 70 years ago, and is still going strong. So those of you who are in grad school and it seems kind of interminable and depressing, cheer up, you're going to live to 94 at least, and still be writing articles actually about British history. So that would be, that's a big advantage Chicago has. Once you walk across the Midway at midnight, a lot of times, I guess, when you're in your 20s, you're tough enough to make it into your 90s, So anyway, it's good to be here. I gotta say one word also on the future of the Republican Party thing. Just thinking about the title. These things are so unpredictable and cyclical. I've been in Washington long enough where the Republicans were dead in '93. One forgets how big the Clinton victory was in '93 and how exhausted the Republican Party looks. One forgets how cocky Republicans were in 2005 after Bush wins re-election. Karl Rove, they control both houses of Congress, reform Social Security. That worked out great, that 2 years of Bush. And one forgets, of course, in '09, huge majorities for President Obama in the Senate and the House, and they had all the young people, and the Republicans were pathetic, and then they had a big civil war with the Tea Party, and then 6 years later they control both houses and the presidency and 31 or something governorship. So these things are very hard to predict and tend somewhat to be, you get these, everyone at the peak, it's like the stock market, right? Everyone's bullish at the peak, so it's usually good to be contrarian. So as soon as I saw those articles, Republicans have never been stronger, and you look at the state legislatures, look at this, look at that, I figured, short the Republican Party is probably a good idea. Exactly right. I don't want that to happen. I'm just saying analytically. Look, on foreign policy, the public doesn't know that much often about the details of foreign policy. They don't like difficult wars. They don't like, on the other hand, being attacked, so they kind of veer back and forth between a kind of we're war weary and let's get tough and let's beat these guys. Trump was clever politically in combining those two. Let's stay out of all these messy wars, nation building. And I do think he was helped, ironically, by Obama having also criticized nation building. So there are like 10 of us who were sort of there were 6 liberal internationalists and 14 conservative internationalists left by the end of 2016 after Trump and Obama and even Hillary Clinton had to walk away from the TPP and so forth, and of course apologize effusively for a vote on Iraq. I think members of Congress, are a little, I've seen this come and go a little bit. They also know the implications of withdrawal. I think, honestly, after 12 years of Obama and Trump, which do have in common, for all their huge differences, a certain skepticism about nation building, about interventionism, about the use of force. We need to focus, as Obama said, nation building at home is what requires our attention. I think we'll see the consequences of inaction. It was very easy to see the downside of action after 16 years, really, I would say, of Clinton and Bush. Are the Balkans perfect? No. Was Afghanistan easy? No. Was the Iraq War messed up in the first few years? Sure. And did other things happen that maybe shouldn't have happened? Maybe, though I'd say on the whole, actually, the world benefited from those 16 years of Clinton and Bush. Let's see what it looks like after 12 years of Obama and Trump. 500,000 Syrians are dead. That's due to inaction. That inaction has consequences just as action does. So and look, at the end of the day, you've got to make these decisions based on what's in the American interest and in the interest of the world. And I do think there's been too much, honestly, fine, the public is war weary and all that, but catering to the public. The TPP was important for the U.S., I think, this is the Asia trade deal. It was negotiated by presidents of both parties. Even if you had doubts about it, just the fact that it was negotiated by presidents of both parties with fellow democracies in Asia should have given one huge reluctance to just walk away from it. And when I looked at that debate in 2016, Hillary Clinton insincerely said she wasn't for it. Trump sincerely hates all these trade deals and isn't for it. That's bad for the country, I think. And so it's bad for the country if Republican members in Congress now accede, in my view, to Trump's view of foreign policy. I think he sincerely holds it. I think it's misguided. And it will be an interesting test of Republicans on the trade issue. I mean, Vinda's done a lot of thinking about this too, on the trade issue, on building up the military, on international policy generally. The reason I'm a Reagan internationalist is that I think Reagan internationalism is basically correct. And I'm proud to be a part of a party that, from Reagan to Bush to Dole to Bush to McCain to Romney, was basically right, I think, on the big international issues facing the world, facing the country and facing the world. And I think it's unfortunate that Trump has taken us in a different direction.
Congressman Weber, you were there helping Newt Gingrich engineer the Republican Revolution throughout the 1980s. You've also spent the years since focusing on democracy promotion. What are the political and policy consequences of this Trumpian turn to embrace Russia and to change the foreign policy order?
Well, first of all, do I have to answer the question, or can I do what these guys do?
Totally. I can't believe a congressman is even pretending to ask that question.
They're my friends. Okay, I'm just kidding, but not really. I do want to say also, I have to say, it's a pleasure to be at the University of Chicago. I was a fellow at the IOP in its first year of existence, and I had a great time, and it was, I hope the students did too. My seminar was every week on the issue of the role of democracy promotion in U.S. foreign policy. And the point I tried to make to all the students that were participating, I brought in a lot of guests, bipartisan, and what was that it's always been contentious. There's always been a debate about the role of foreign. George Kennan, the great philosopher or great theorist and architect of the post-war era, was pretty much negative on the notion that democracy promotion should play any role in U.S. foreign policy. There's always been an argument about this, but most of the time, most presidents, most administrations come back to the notion that for the United States of America, with our unique place in history, and I do believe it's a unique place in history, to conduct a foreign policy devoid of basic values of self-government and human rights is just not possible. You can argue about, how you want to promote that, and of course it got totally warped around the invasion of Iraq, which I think is a legitimate issue to talk about, but we did not invade Iraq as a democracy promotion exercise. And unfortunately, in the wake of the war, that's how it was interpreted by many people, and a lot of people said, so as a result of which, you only get about a third of the American public today that says that they think that the support for democracy should be a part of U.S. foreign policy. I think that's really unfortunate, and I think it's wrong, and I think this administration, like the one before it, like the Bush administration, which said we should have a more humble foreign policy, will all eventually decide there has to be some appropriate role for supporting basic human rights, the right to self-government, and democracy as an ideal, consistent with national security and in a pragmatic way. I'm not foolish about this. And I think they'll come to that. Russia is particularly problematic in terms of that formulation because when I first became chairman of the National Endowment for Democracy, which is, by the way, a volunteer position, I don't get paid to do this, but I've been on that board as chairman or a member for 15 years now. There was not a lot of overt governmental opposition to us. A few places, North Korea, Cuba, a few places where the government itself would stop us from doing the things that we do, which is supporting local efforts always. We don't come in with a heavy hand, made in the USA. That's changed in the last 5, 6 years, 10 years maybe, and we now see governments officially cracking down on any outside entity, NGOs that want to promote democracy and human rights. And the architect of that strategy is Vladimir Putin. He passed a law this is not a theory, he passed a law in Moscow cracking down on NGOs. It was picked up and replicated by Chavez in Venezuela and other places. So the Russians are not just resistant to democracy, They are actively engaged in the business of suppressing democracy and trying to undermine it where it exists around the world. I don't fault the president for wanting a better relationship with Russia, and as I think Jack pointed out, both President Bush and President Obama wanted to do the same thing. It didn't work out. That does not cause me to say that it's wrong to try. I don't fault the president for wanting to try. But understand that this is not just a lot of misunderstandings with Russia. They are actively working against things that we believe in a very serious and concerted way.
So do you think, real quick from all of you, in 2018, 2020, do voters shrug at all this, the alarmism we've seen in some quarters of the press, within the Republican Party, the more traditional wings? Do voters shrug at all the Trump embrace of Putin? Or do the Republicans pay a cost?
I don't know. We'll see what happens with the policy. I mean, the people that President Trump has put in place to conduct policy are people that I'm pretty comfortable with.
Tillerson,
Mr.
Mattis.
Tillerson, General Mattis, Pompeo, Nikki Haley, a little bit inexperienced, but right on target in terms of what she believes. So, let's see how the policy actually works out. I'm not convinced that it's going to work out badly. And I do think that we can prematurely judge this administration based on things that they've done in the first month or in the transition period. It takes a certain amount of time for an administration to get its feet on the ground, and particularly for a president who does not have governmental experience and ran explicitly as an outsider. You got to back off a little bit and say, well, let's wait until the people are put in place and the policies are refined, and we'll see what actually happens. So I'm not convinced it's going to work out badly.
Bill, you and I were talking before this event about 2016 election. And this is a key question within the White House right now among people who work for the president about what actually happened in 2016 in terms of the Republican Party. Was change elected or was Trumpism elected? So do Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller and Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, do they truly have a mandate from these 300 plus electoral votes to implement a new vision for the party and for the country? Or was it just kind of a reaction to Clinton and the global economy? And how do you think the Republican Party should think through this? Does Trump have a mandate for Trumpism? Whatever that incoherent ideology is still evolving. No, it is still evolving. Even Trump would admit that, I think. Or was it change?
I mean, look, so many things happened, obviously, in 2015 and 16 that one can interpret. I mean, I personally find this an interesting topic, but one could spend hours interpreting this mattered the most. Or I think Trump got very, very lucky in his opposition of Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton. If you were in it was a change environment. And he had, in the primary and then in the general election, the two least change-like human beings you could have imagined out of the 330 million in America. And I'm not really saying this I don't mean to be nasty or pejorative. I mean, it's a fact. You have the wife of a former president and the brother and son of a former president as his two main opponents. So if you were unhappy about the way things have gone for the last 25 years, and there's quite a lot of unhappiness out there, I could argue that it's excessive and people are being a little unreasonable, but whatever, that's where they were. Trump was able to exploit it first in the primaries and then obviously in the general election. I always said during the general that I thought Trump had a 1 in 3, 1 in 4 chance of winning. I thought the Clinton campaign and why? Because I thought the Clinton campaign was not attentive enough. It was hard for them because of who she was and the incumbent 8 years in the White House and all that stuff, but it was not attentive enough to the mood of change. I learned this in '92. I came to Washington in '85. I ran a Senate race in '88. I was in the Bush-Quayle White House as Quayle's chief of staff. So I was the first real president, the only presidential election I've really been involved in was when I was Vice President Quayle's chief of staff in '92. George H.W. Bush was not a bad president, if I can say. And historians will look back in a pretty friendly way on those 4 years and on the 12 years, I believe, of Reagan-Bush. But I remember just, I was with Quayle there. We were in endless meetings, looking at polling, focus groups, speaking. And people wanted change. They were tired after 12 years of Reagan-Bush. The Cold War had ended. No good deed goes unpunished. Reagan and Bush win the Cold War, and everyone decides, that was nice, thank you. Now we want someone to focus on domestic policy. Clinton really understood this, incidentally. Paid no price for not having much foreign policy experience. The first President Bush, he couldn't believe what was happening because he's in the political era he had grown up in. He had done what presidents are supposed to do. Manage the national security policy of the country competently and responsibly, and he figured I've done what I'm supposed to do as president. The domestic policy stuff you know, Congress does most of that, and there's a business cycle you don't control, and it wasn't terrible under Bush. So he figured he'd get reelected. He just couldn't believe the polls. But it was a new era. Clinton saw that. But I saw the power of that psychology of change. Trump grasped that. I mean, running as an outsider, he fit right into it. And so I think that was key. But at the end of the day, I think when, again, without getting to metaphysics of what the election was about, just empirically, he got 46% of the vote. He drew an inside straight in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. That was smart. That was clever. That is sort of that was more of a Bannonite, if you want, strategy. He maximized his vote with the white working class. He lost votes from Romney among college-educated, and he ended up netting out about the same in terms of the popular vote, but better, obviously, than the Electoral College. I think as a practical matter, he needs to increase his support, not decrease his support. I just think this is the most elementary kind of political science. If you start off with 46% of the vote, it's probably a good idea for you and your political party to move up to 50 or 51. And I would say that he is not, I take Vin's point that it's very early days, but I see he hasn't done a very good job in the first 3 weeks of doing that. And even though the media is so hostile and the Democratic Party is hostile and some Republicans like me are somewhat hostile, still he had a chance as a president-elect to do this. Bush won a very nasty, tough Bush-Gore recount election at 48%. Didn't have a terribly good start, actually, for other reasons, but still was at 53% approval now. Trump's at 40. I just think empirically.
If the gentleman will yield.
And Obama was at 62 at this point. So I would just say, let me just finish this point and I'll shut up. I think just as if I were a Trump supporter who was being cold-eyed and not drinking the Kool-Aid about how he's got this magic thing that taps into middle America.
About you, Jack.
Not Jack, but others. I would be worried. I mean, he is down at 40% approval, and he started off at 46, presumably with the vote that he had. And he hasn't had to make a lot of tough decisions yet. This should be easy the first 3-4 weeks. You should be able to build support. You should find stuff that you can get bipartisan approval of. He makes some good appointments. And immediately he steps on those by doing controversial things. So does he getting credit for having one of the great generals of our age, Jim Mattis, as Secretary of Defense? Is he getting credit for some of the things that you think he could? No, because he's stepping all over the stuff. So I would be worried if I were a Trump supporter.
Real quick, and then we'll go to Vin. Congressman Kingston, when you talk to your former colleagues in the House, do they want the Trump revolution in Congress?
They're excited because they want to get things done. It's like a team that practices for a game. They haven't been able to play for many, many years. Now they have an opportunity to see their bills moving, and so they are excited. And frankly, I got to say this as somebody who was on the daily trail with the Trump folks, and by that I mean I did lots of surrogate stuff on media. Most of my stuff was like a total food fight on CNN and MSNBC. I looked over the fence with great envy at Newt Gingrich and Rudy Giuliani as they were doing the heavy lift on Sean Hannity, which consisted of, I was telling Vin earlier, consisted of, don't you think Hillary's bad? Oh, yes, Rudy, she's real bad. Newt, do you think she's bad? Oh, very bad, Sean. and meanwhile, Kingston, it says here that when he was a freshman in college, Trump ran over a turtle and he was smiling about it in front of small children and seniors. And so I can tell you that if you strip off all the bark, it really boiled down to change and outsider. Particularly outsider. I think change was cyclical. It could have been the benefit of any Republican or Democrat, but the outsider magic. You know what? Are you happy with what's going on in Washington? Do you think they listen to you? And people say, hell no, they don't. And it really was, excuse my French, but it was a hell no. They don't listen to me. They don't understand me. And they consider my part of the country flyover country. And Ohio has become a rust belt now, and he is going to get the rust back off it and shine up the tools of industry and manufacturing again. And so I think that outsider message really, really made a big difference. But to me, the House members are going to be easier to contend with than the Senate members. Senators, by nature, have to be even a little bit more independent. And Bush had to put up with McCain. Very independent guy, and Chafee, and Olympia Snow was a thorn, and so Trump is going to have McCain again. He's going to have Lindsey Graham, and apparently he's going to have Susan Collins and some other difficulties. But and in the House, you always have somebody who's taken a term limit of 6 years because they're running for governor or senator, and they're against everything. And often, and I was in the majority when we had a 5-vote difference. and under Denny Hastert, but we still got bills passed and still did better than what they're doing now with the highest margin in history. But we did not have the outside rating groups and the influence. And one of the problems that Trump is going to have to overcome, and Paul Ryan, is voting purity, because the Republicans, generally speaking, haven't really had to do a heavy lift in 8 years. When I came to Congress, Ben Weber had actually left, and he bequeathed to me some of his great staffers, and so got off to a very good start, and I'm forever indebted to him. But at that time, we were in the minority, and Tom Foley was the speaker. My voting record, as measured by base Republicans, was excellent. I was there every time they needed a good no vote. I was there. Then we got in the majority, and Newt Gingrich became the speaker, and we had an agenda. My voting record got tarnished a little bit. And then Bush got elected, and my voting record went straight to hell, because you have to vote on things like the debt ceiling, and you have to compromise things on No Child Left Behind, which for Republicans, all their talk about local education, No Child Left Behind brought more power to Washington. And so I think that the president is going to have to conquer that inertia in the House of people who really haven't had to vote on a team, and they haven't had to govern in 8 years, and now they're going to have to. And then he's going to have the McCain factor of I'd say the renegade, free spirit, independent Republicans.
This isn't
Can I
a normal.
just say one? I totally agree on the outsider point. I think that's a very important point and can't be underestimated. Trump is the only president in American history who has neither held elective office nor held a cabinet office nor been a general officer of the United States military. And so that's historic, which means, incidentally, that a lot of the predictions are hard to make, because we've just never really had this experiment before of such an outsider trying to govern. But I think Jack's point, just to put the dot the I across, governing matters. When Trump won, the guy who was for Trump and didn't like, was annoyed that I was not for Trump, said, well, see, it's just like Reagan, the Reagan Revolution and now the Trump Revolution. I said, the Reagan Revolution was not defeating Jimmy Carter in 1980. The Reagan Revolution was governing for 8 years and defeating the Soviet Union and getting the economy going, and also getting Bush basically a 4-year successor term where he finished up the Cold War and stuff. So the Trump Revolution, if there is one, will require legislation. It can't just be executive orders repealing some of President Obama's, though I'm for some of those. And that really is the question. And it's legislating is not easy. And 52 Republicans is not a huge majority in the Senate. And I do think there was a certain amount of Kool-Aid drinking after the election among conservatives who were not experienced, commentators. Hey, Trump won, huge upset, very impressive. Republicans held the Senate, sort of a surprise. They only lost 6 seats in the House. That was good. Okay, it's going to be great. Tax plan, ACA repeal and replace. Everything's going to go through and get rid of all that environmental stuff we hate. And again, on substance, I'm with the Republicans on 90% of this, but it's not easy to do this, and that will be the test, I think. And there's, I think his approval rating matters some. And I would say personally, you guys talk to these members more than I do, and I'd be very curious what you think. I think a month ago there was you know what, Trump's a little flaky, maybe not my first choice, but I think we can work with him or around him or with the cabinet secretaries and kind of get stuff done. We can make it work. I would say now, privately, it's, oh my God. I mean, is this manageable? Are the wheels just going to come off? I mean, am I going to be able to support this guy 3 months from now? That's a question. I mean, it's not fair because he's only been there a month, but I would say the mood has shifted in a way that's tougher for Trump now than a month ago.
So you're all talking about what's possible with President Trump, but David Brooks recently wrote a column where he said Republicans may have struck a Faustian bargain, that Republicans may think they're going to get tax reform, they could get a replacement for the Affordable Care Act. But you have a president who's tweeting constantly. You have a president who proposed a Muslim ban and now is banning people from several nations. You have a chief of staff who a few years ago said the Republican Party needs to reach out more to minority groups. And you had a president today in a press conference who didn't know what the CBC meant until it was explained to him. So what is the consequence for the Republican Party moving forward? We had all this talk post-2012, reaching out to minority groups, having a more moderate centrist message. And you got a hardline president who really takes different views on some of these ethnic groups and Muslims in particular. What's the cost here?
Let's go back to your question that set off this last filibuster, which was.
I do want you to all kind of grapple with this idea that the Republican Party thinks you can get all these things done.
I got to say, by the way,
so much of the country is alarmed by what's happening,
and no one
really wants to talk about it.
Your question, though, about whether or not the election was a rejection of the status quo, things like that, or whether it actually affirmed Trumpism, I think is the wrong question. I think if you look at big change elections throughout our history, they've almost always had less ideological content in the election itself. Roosevelt ran on a platform not hardly related to the New Deal, but it didn't matter. He was a Democrat, Hoover was a Republican, we were in the middle of the Depression. They voted him up. Then he finally found the New Deal. Even Reagan, well, I came into office with Reagan, I dragged him into office on my coattails. And you know, even at that time, we all thought of Reagan as a great philosophical conservative leader, but he mainly won because, you know, the unemployment rate was in double digits and inflation was in double digits, and Carter was running around the world apologizing for America, a preview of the Obama administration in my view. But the point was, with those presidents, they got elected because things were bad and people wanted to change. And then they were able to put that mandate into a philosophical framework that made sense to people. And Roosevelt did usher in an era of what we now would think of as the liberal welfare state government or positive government in John Dewey's phrase, whatever phrase you want to use. Reagan ushered in an era of conservative government, free market, supply side, things like that. The question about Trump is not, was this a mandate for Trumpism? It was a rejection of a time and period that people didn't like, just like Roosevelt and Reagan. The question is, can he put this into a framework that does create a new politics in this country? And it's possible, I think. If it happens, he'll transform the Republican Party. He may well create a new majority for at least a period of time. No majorities in politics are permanent. But we don't know that yet. His candidates, at least with Roosevelt and even more so with Reagan, you had some idea of where their anchors were politically and philosophically. Less so with Donald Trump. Doesn't mean that he can't do it. It just means we haven't seen it yet. But it has yet to be created. The question of what does his victory mean is not the right question. The question is, what is he going to turn his victory into?
And Bannon thinks about things about getting rid of the right-left debate in this country, that it could actually be populist and nationalist versus globalist. This is what he has articulated for over 2 decades in his private life, that the access could be changed in American politics. But as Bannon and Trump kind of work together to maybe reimagine American politics, there were 2 questions today at the press conference, over an hour long, by President Trump. 2 questions about how anti-Semitism is rising in the view of the questioners at the press conference in this country as kind of a symptom of the Trump presidency. Many students I've spoken to here at the University of Chicago say even if President Trump is not explicitly using racially charged language, he is animating elements in this country that are racially charged or even racist. And women who I encountered at the D.C. March, they feel alarmed by President Trump. So I think, doesn't the Republican Party, whether you think this is fair or not of a criticism of Trump, what happens now that many elements in this country, many people, feel the Republican Party represents these things, which I know you all, when you're during your congressional terms and Bill during his career, have not advocated, but yet now that stain, in a sense, or that association, whether fair or not, is linked to the party many of you have been associated with for decades.
Well, Jack was a Trump surrogate, I was a Trump critic within the Republican Party, but let's start by saying, I had substantive arguments with candidate Trump, but I also had just plain political arguments. I thought he was going to lead us to a devastating defeat. Wrong about that. I thought he was going to devastate us in the Hispanic and African American communities. Wrong about that. He didn't resurrect us, but he did a little better than Romney did. That's not what I thought was going to happen. So the notion that he has led us to political disaster, which many of the skeptics and critics of the president thought was going to happen, has not happened to date. Which tells me a couple of things. First of all, I think that the so-called autopsy, poorly named, but the right thing to do after the 2012 election that said the Republicans have to do better with the emerging demographics in this country, Hispanics and young people and women. I think that's still right. But I think that what the election says, the things I was wrong about, says that Trump has an opportunity to grow with those voters. I spoke to a group of African Americans recently, but they were broadly concerned about the Republican Party's approach to the minority community. And somebody said something pretty smart to me. He said, "We keep hearing about Trump as the champion of the white working class. What if you just took the word white out of that formulation?" I thought, that's pretty smart. Most African Americans and Hispanics are working class people. They have the same concerns as white working class people, economically and otherwise. There's a potential for him to broaden this movement on behalf of the Republican Party, consistent with the demographic change that's taking place in the country.
Bill?
Well, I mean, I suppose it's possible, but he doesn't seem to show much interest in doing that, and I don't know that his policies are making it easier. I mean, I think my answer for the Republican future is that the Republican future needn't be Trump's future. Needn't be a Trumpite future. I hope it's not. I don't want to be part of an ethnic nationalist party against a quote global, whatever globalist means. But honestly, if it came down to it, I'd be with the globalists. Are we going to be anti-free trade? Are we going to be against American internationalism? I am the globalist. And I'm proud of it. I mean, this is, again, the lunacy. I mean, if people want to convince themselves that everything is horrible in America, the last 70 years are something to be ashamed of, or the last 30 years, or the last 24 years since the end of the Cold War, I guess they can convince themselves of that, but it's not true empirically. I mean, there is this thing called reality, you know, and we can look around and we can see how America is doing compared to how it was 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. Is it a worse off? Are people, you know, there has been stagnation of working class incomes. There are problems with family structure. Charles Murray, Bob Putnam. I'm very familiar with all this stuff, and I'm worried about it. And I do think it was a problem that Republicans and Democrats, in fact, weren't attentive enough to some of these problems. But that is, you are throwing out the baby with the bathwater, in my opinion, if you go down Bannon's path. And I do think, incidentally, politically, it's also going to be disastrous. Trump drew an inside straight with a shrinking coalition being able to get him over the top in the Electoral College, barely. If you were more and more people are going to college. If you are the party of the non-college educated, by definition, you are going to have a smaller and smaller percentage of the electorate every 4 years. If you were a smaller percentage of the electorate is white every 4 years. If you're the party of the whites only or mostly, you're going to have a smaller percentage of the electorate. And if you have the older voters, more of your voters are going to die than the younger voters, unless they have PhDs from the University of Chicago, you know. So, I mean, I just think it's, you know, he won. I give him a lot of credit. I didn't think he would. They had a clever campaign. They saw the Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania opportunity. They beat back kind of things that would have killed perhaps other candidates. He had a kind of amazing appeal that managed to resuscitate him time and time again in ways that I didn't expect. But now it's about governing. I guess I would put this. If he can say 4 years from now to African Americans, look, you're better off. Betsy DeVos has done things in education that have helped replicate the DC and New York charter school experiences across the country, and I'm a big supporter of that. If that happens, if they know how to, it's limited to what the federal government can do, but if they can work stuff in Congress on that, if the economy is picked back up, then he has a real chance. But I very much agree with Vin on this. That's about governing, and I wouldn't say he has shown much appreciation of or interest in the kind of governing that could turn a very narrow electoral college majority into a governing majority.
You know, when Bill started out, he talked about his mother. I have known Bill's mother for over 30 years, and the fact that she has lived to 94 has to be hugely disconcerting to your critics.
You were, Congressman Kingston, you were a Ted Cruz supporter, you were a mainstream Republican in Congress for years, and now you're a Trump Republican.
Well,
do you have any?
Yeah, let me say this. If you take a step back and I ask you to say which group of voters is the most underserved by government, who gets the least amount of attention? The rich, the poor, or the people who make between $50,000 and $200,000 a year? Now, in my opinion, the people who get the least amount of service from government are the people who make $50,000 to $200,000 a year. When I was first elected to the Georgia State Legislature, I was 29 years old, it was 1984, and it was there were 26 Republicans out of 180. Georgia was really a very, very reliable blue state, except for in presidential elections, but everything else was absolutely, we had Newt Gingrich in the House, and that was it. No other Republicans, no senators or anything. The Democrat Speaker of the House, who was one of the longest-serving Democrats, or longest-serving Speaker in the history of the United States, he and I were friends, and he told me, he said, son, let me tell you who always gets screwed. It's the people in that category. And it stuck with me now over 30 years later. That's who really and truly gets underserved. And it really doesn't matter if you're Hispanic, black, or white. You get a short end of the stick by the U.S. government. I can tell you that the people come to see me, or saw me when I was in Congress, they didn't fall into that category. Why? Because they were working. They were back home working, and when they had money, their dang dryer broke. They couldn't go to Washington. They couldn't take the kids to Disney World. They had to replace the dryer. I had to buy a new set of tires or braces. And so to me, where Trump really spoke is to those people. And I think that, as Bill says, hey, 4 years from now, if he can come back to Chicago and say, you know what, I worked with Rahm, maybe not with Rahm, but maybe with others, and we helped bring down the crime rate, helped lower the murders, went back to Milwaukee, and we have more jobs there. And I'm going back to Mexico City, and we're still working with Mexico, even though there's a lot of disagreement about immigration policy. I think then he's going to have a really great shot at 4 more years.
A quick follow-up on that. So Trump perhaps helps win over those people who are 50,000 to 200,000 income. But what do you say to people who confront you, like a lot of people have spoken to me here at University of Chicago, where, okay, you're speaking for everyday Americans, however you want to define them, you're helping build a new Republican coalition, but at the same time, in the view of some Americans, you're, as a Trump Republican and Trump supporter, an advocate, you're advocating hate. You're people who are supporting of a Muslim ban, people who want to have a hardline policy of immigration. What's your answer to that?
Well,
I'd
I'd say that's part of the narrative. And I understand if I was on the left, that's the narrative I'd promote. But there are 46 Muslim countries in the world. If he wanted to have a Muslim ban, why did he choose 7? He chose 7 because those were the ones chosen by John Kerry and Barack Obama as the countries of concern, because we don't know anything about their documentation. We don't have good information. And this stuff about people being vetted for 2 years when they come here, 23 months, or 23 months and 6 days, they're just sitting on some bureaucrat's desk. The last day they get a stamp. There's not some thorough vetting. Where are they going to call? Yemen? Hey, tell me about Bob Smith. Are they going to call? Well, I don't know. He came from Somalia. Well, let me find out about, maybe the good folks in Sudan and Libya are going to tell us. These were 7 countries designated by John Kerry. This wasn't an arbitrary thing, but I know the Muslim thing fit, and Rudy Giuliani did not help, and the campaign rhetoric absolutely did not help, but the substance wasn't that at all. And I think his outreach to African Americans, I think frankly it was very challenging. Are you happy with your current results? That in inner cities that are predominantly African American, you still keep electing the Democrat Party. Does that serve you best? I would argue that it wouldn't. D.C. school had a very, very popular and successful, privately funded, for the most part, started by Ted Forsman, a school choice program. And Barack Obama discontinued it. And kids and their moms would line up for hours and hours to try to get in on that school choice in Washington, D.C., where some of the worst schools in the nation are. And Barack Obama came and canceled the program. And how does that serve the inner city children?
So we have a few more minutes before we get to the Q&A. One thing, as a reporter going around the country, and you go to these Republican headquarters in different states, a lot of old people, not very active. I know college Republicans here I've met, they're very active here. But the media, it seems, Fox News, Breitbart, seems to have almost replaced the party in a lot of places, that people don't institutionally associate with the Republican Party in counties and states like they used to, and the media has kind of almost become the party. When you look at the media today and the power, Bill, maybe start with you. You founded the Weekly Standard. There was a traditional conservative media for a long time, National Review magazine, where I used to work as a reporter at Weekly Standard, the Wall Street Journal. And now it's this whole ecosystem of blogs and Breitbart and Fox News. And it seems like when people on the right in this country are looking for their cues, they're not actually looking to the future or the Republican Party. They're looking to different media outlets. And has the media on the right changed, and how has it become really the party itself, or is that wrong?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, one of the nice things about running the Weekly Standard for 20 years, being there, was how many young people wanted to work there and how many good young people we recruited, I think, or who showed up anyway, and we hired and went on to good things like you did from the National Review. And I mean, so I never felt, especially in the last several years, I never felt, gee, like there aren't bright young conservatives around the country. They were a minority probably on their college campuses mostly, but maybe that's better for them. They developed their debating skills and their thinking skills a little more than if they could be in a complacent majority. But I would say among elected officials, this is why the Trump thing was such a reversal. And people can say we were wrong not to see it coming, but I don't really buy that. I just think he turned out to be a much better candidate than one expected, and all kinds of other things happened, and he won. In 2015, Republicans recruited and ran and elected a huge number of young senators and congressmen. The Republican conference, I think this is true today still, in the House and the Senate is on average 6 or 7 years younger than the Democratic conference.
I
Is that
bet
not
more
right?
than that. Not only that, but if you look at the committee chairs, one of the huge problems that, I don't know if you know the name Tim Ryan, but he challenged Nancy Pelosi. He's a young new face of middle America, comes out of Ohio. He got clobbered, but one of his big arguments was that look at our party, talking to fellow Democrats, we're all old, but not on the House side and the Republican side.
Trump reversed that. He was the oldest guy to win. I mean, I would never predict it. That's why I did think it was time for generational turnover. Romney became a great time for Rubio, Walker, et cetera.
What about the conservative media?
Look at, a
the
party
party wasn't able to stop. The party wasn't able to stop Trump.
A party with Elise Stefanik and Tom Cotton and Ben Sass. I do not think this is a party of people out of touch with America.
No, well, I'm not saying
future
there's a next
ideas.
generation for sure. There's a rising generation of stars. People would acknowledge that, but the party, the institutions of the party, did not stop Trump. What enabled Trump? Some people
The parties are weak. I mean, look at
So
the
is the
Democratic.
conservative media more powerful than the party?
Well, in
It's
part,
not, it's not just me. I mean,
everything is more powerful than the
I
party.
mean, the parties have been hollowed out
Yes.
and replaced by, the media is part of it, but also by single issue groups in both parties that are more influential with parties with candidates today than the party structures. If you're a Republican, you care more about what the anti-tax people say and the pro-lifers say and folks like that, and the gun people. And if you're a Democrat, you care more about the environmentalists and the LGBTQ community. I mean, there's nothing wrong with advocating any of those positions, but except that they don't have an interest in creating a majority. They have an interest in distilling their message down to its base argument to attract, in the case of the NRA, 5 million hardcore supporters. Parties actually serve a purpose because they have an interest in getting to a majority. The parties have been hollowed out. The parties have been replaced by media and interest groups, and the financing of politics is another whole issue, and voters. And it leads to another question, which you should probably do a whole panel on sometime, which is the future of the two-party system itself, which I think is very, very shaky going forward.
But Congressman Kingston, right now, in the way the Republican Party works, if you're a member of Congress and you hear Speaker Ryan's going to come after you, and you hear Breitbart's going to come after you, what matters more to you?
Neither one would be a threat. And I'll tell you why, because in your own district, you're an independent contractor, and you kind of know which coalitions. Zell Miller actually referred to interest groups as a bunch of colicky babies, and politicians as the nurse running around with a bottle, not enough milk for everybody. And that is the truth. I mean, in each district, you have your own very loud interest groups, and if you can't really raise your own money and run your own show, you're in trouble. I think it's about 30 seats a year that are actually contested. The rest of them may have an opponent, but you can look at reapportionment and you can tell who's going to win the seat. But there's 30 that really sit, and that's the only seats where parties play a big role because they can come in with an infusion of cash as an independent expenditure. But otherwise, you don't want to take Paul Ryan off in that case, but otherwise.
I mean, campaign finance is a big contributor to the weakening of the parties too, but I would just say, to get to your point though, Bob, and the macro point, I would say, the truth is, look, 45% of Democrats voted for Sanders against the anointed, next candidate of the Democratic Party. 45% of Republicans voted for Trump, the total outsider, against what was not stupidly thought to be a pretty good field that had sort of something for everyone. You had your Ted Cruz, if you were conservative, you had your Jeb Bush, if you were establishment, you had your Rubio and Walker, if you wanted younger senator or governor. It wasn't a terrible field. And nonetheless, Trump was. So think about that. 45% of Americans in the primaries in each party, about the same numbers voted in each party, so 45% of Americans, period, voted for Sanders and Trump, who both ran against the consensus of American politics in the last 30 years and against the consensus of their own party's politics in the last 25 years. Barack Obama was the most liberal president in American history, and Bernie Sanders spent the whole campaign saying things are horrible because Obama has not advanced progressivism enough for the last 8 years. And I'm not mocking that. I mean, that's a very revealing thing. And Trump spent all of his time running as much against Bush as against Obama. So that does tell you, this is your point, there was popular support for opposition to both parties in 2016. You combine that with the institutional things that Vin and Jack have mentioned that hollows out the parties, and I very much agree with Vin. The two-party system has a lot of legacy strength, and it probably continues to have that, and it's still easier to win a party primary and then become a congressman than run as an independent, but it wouldn't take much, it strikes me. It's like the Soviet Union in 1984 or something. It's a very impressive edifice, but you sort of wonder what's happening under the surface and what it would take to really shatter the two-party system, I think.
All right, let's get to questions.
Hi, my name is Matt Enlow, and I'm a second-year student at the law school. Tonight, Robert thankfully touched on the issues of anti-Semitism and racism surrounding Trump supporters, but I'd like to ask a question on the issue from another angle. One of the pervasive narratives we've seen since the election is that there are generally two camps in the White House: traditional establishment Republicans, Reince, Pence et al., and a new class of nationalist neo-reactionaries, Bannon, Miller et al., working with billionaire CEO type A secretaries. This group of authoritarians who associate with white supremacists and question the authority of the federal judiciary seems like a threat to the party. Is the Republican Party willing to stand up to toxic factions within the White House, even if it means alienating part of Trump's base?
Thank you.
It's an objective question.
I tell you what, we have a long line, and what I would like to, I'll spend no more than 30 seconds and just wave me, and we'll just go quickly. I just have to say, to continue saying these people are white supremacists shortchanges your intellectual stance here, because there's no proof to that. I know it's great rhetoric, but they come from different backgrounds to the degree that the RNC was outside of the Trump campaign, and the Trump campaign consisted of a smaller, more agile, nimble, non-political, or excuse me, I'd say non-Washington type. But I think they're going to be woven together fine. It's just going to take a while for everybody to get together. I think the reports of turmoil within the White House is mostly promoted by those who are critics of the White House.
He was just referencing, I think, the alt-right and how that...
I got to say this, 22 years in Congress, 8 years in the state legislature, as the Lord is my witness, I never heard the term alt-right until Steve Bannon became public enemy number one in August this year. And I think from my district in Georgia, if there was some underground nefarious movement called the alt-right, I would know about it. And I say that sincerely. I just do not believe this alt-right is more of a fabrication of the left than a creation of the right.
Oh, I think Bannon's done a good job of manufacturing something out of something that I don't think has much actual support. And I think Republicans in Congress, if they're intelligent, as Paul Ryan did in 2016 when he had a primary challenge from someone loved, I don't agree with the Breitbart's so powerful. Breitbart loved, who was that guy running against Ryan?
Yeah, I can't
Naley or something?
Paul
Naylor?
Nehlen.
Yeah, who got 16% of the vote in the primary challenge. They're intimidated by Trump right now. The guy won the presidency in a huge upset, and he likes attacking people, and he succeeded a couple of times in successfully, apparently, attacking people. And politicians are not, on the whole, in the business of standing up to people who they are worried about or groups that they're worried about. And he's the president of their own party, and there's always a certain deference. So I myself am disappointed by their timidity in standing up to aspects of the Trump administration. I think that's honestly changing, and I also just don't think on the ground, look, 90% of Trump voters voted for Mitt Romney. That is a fact. They were not huge, wow, Trump, alt-right. They were Republicans. Half of them voted for Trump reluctantly because they thought they couldn't stand Hillary Clinton. They didn't want 4 more years of Democratic and liberal policies, and they thought Trump could be weaved into a Republican fabric. There are Trump loyalists out there, but that is not, in my view, the majority of the Trump vote, let alone of the country. And I think Republicans in Congress will wake up. They're aware of that. They're a little tentative right now, but I think they will end up being more oppositional to aspects of the Trump administration than we've seen so far.
Appreciate your question.
Thanks. I'd love to chat with you afterwards.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Tala Mountjoy. I'm in the Booth School of Business here. And Mr. Crystal, my question is specifically for you. I wanted to ask about one of your most recent tweets. And I apologize for going to Twitter for a source. It might not be part of the GOP's future, but it's certainly part of the present. So you said Trump's first term feels a bit like Nixon's second. Wildly overconfident president, poor White House staff, losing court cases, Hill GOP losing confidence. So my question to you is, do you foresee Trump's first term ending like Nixon's second term as well?
Yeah, I can't criticize you for quoting a tweet that I went to the trouble of tweeting, right?
I just want to know how he said all that in 140
that's pretty
characters.
impressive, right?
Pretty impressive.
I know, I've been on Twitter 2 years. This is pathetic when you've been on Twitter long enough, in my case, like 2 years, where you start thinking about, abbreviations to get the 140 characters thing. Look, I think there's a huge variety of things that could happen in the Trump presidency, but I'm very worried. Both about the substance of some things and the general chaos, and you saw it today, obviously, it is not a conventional White House. Maybe he has ways of working things out that are not the conventional ways. And every time you criticize this, you look like, well, when I was in the White House, we had interagency processes and everyone just eyes glaze over. That's the old bad Republican Party or the old bad Washington establishment, and Trump's now figured out how to do it all differently. I'm a little skeptical of that. Government and governing is complicated. I'm just not convinced he's thought much about it. He has almost no one in the White House who's been in previous White Houses or administrations. That's fine. Change is good. A lot of people having recycling people isn't good. So I'm open to the notion that it will get better, as Vin has suggested it might. But I'm also open to the notion it won't get better. So I guess I would put it this way: are the chances of this ending up like Nixon, 50% or 30%? No. Are they 0 or 1 or 2%? No. I don't think so. I really don't. I think there's a non-trivial chance that the wheels could totally come off, that he will start ordering people to do things, as Nixon did, that they shouldn't be ordered to do, that people either won't do them or will do them, and either way you get a kind of crisis. Incidentally, what caused Watergate, if we can just take 1 second as a historical curiosity? What was the core thing that got Nixon going on the path of break-ins and illegality?
Pentagon Papers.
Leaks. I hate these leaks. That's what Nixon said, and I want you to break into Ellsberg's office at Brookings, and I want you to break into the DNC and stop this from happening. When presidents become obsessed with leaks, this is a real point, I think, and I saw this even a little in my own White House, where Bush had been RNC chairman when Nixon was president. Bush hated leaks, and there were leaks from the Bush White House, and I was probably even involved in one or two of them. And Bush kind of knew that, so that was a problem. But nonetheless, Bush knew that if you start down the road of leak investigations and stuff, you are really asking for trouble. And you then plus you get the intelligence communities on your case, which Trump has done by minimally being disrespectful of them, and at times being, I think, really kind of crazily derogatory about them in his tweets. You put all that together, it could be combustible. Probably won't be, but could be.
He has to actually do something wrong. One of the things we've said about Watergate for so many years is it's not the crime, it's the cover-up.
Bullshit.
Well, it's the crime.
Yeah, I agree with
that. Trump may be reacting badly to a lot of things, but unless he actually does something criminal, he's not going to end up like me. Nixon actually authorized a criminal activity.
Right.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Aaron Wallace. I'm a first year in the medical school. Trump ran on a campaign against touching Social Security or Medicare, yet congressional Republicans seem quite eager to take on reform. And I was wondering, who do you think is going to win that battle? And second of all, reports have shown that Trump voters are a majority of the beneficiaries of those programs, and what sort of backlash would there be if Republicans take on reform?
I think that the reformers ultimately will have to win. I think if you look at the numbers, there's just no alternative to some kind of long-term reform being done. My own theory on this, it's not even a theory, it's just a guess. But you look at the Trump package of proposals. He wants a big increase in military spending, he wants an infrastructure program, and he wants a tax reform. All of those things are things, by the way, that I think are good ideas. And then how do you reconcile that with budget reality? It's very, very difficult. One way to do it, though, is to say we're going to reform entitlements. We're going to ignore the deficit a little bit for the next 5 years or so, but we're going to reform entitlements so that the long-term debt to GDP ratio does not look as frightening as it does now. In my view, that is the right thing to do. And I have to believe that there's a chance that will happen. I also think, by the way, if we actually do it, there's no political price to be paid for doing it. You look at how entitlement programs have fared politically. It's usually the fear or threat that something is going to happen to an entitlement that causes a real political backlash. When I was in Congress back in 1983, we actually cut Social Security. It was okay. We'd done it. We did it to save the program. We slipped the COLA. We raised taxes on self-employed. We did we raised the retirement age. Once we'd done it.
But you got a bipartisan deal.
And we got a bipartisan deal. That's true.
That's kind of important. No, I mean, that's important politically.
That's very important politically. I agree with that. But the bigger point was, when we'd done it, people could see the world did not come into an end. They didn't take away my Social Security. They're not going to end my Medicare. They did just reform. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about long-term entitlement reform, is sensible reforms that'll keep the program stable. And I think eventually we'll do it.
There wasn't 24/7 media. There weren't 150 super PACs on all these issues. There was an opportunity for
No, there was huge
And
pressure
wait,
on them not
didn't
to do it,
you,
though.
you took a shellacking in '82 and you lost like 30 Republicans.
Yeah, but this happened after
No,
that.
this was
It was after
and
it? But what did they get in trouble for? Tax cuts or what? Recession?
No, it was the recession. In 19,
But-
the Reagan recession was caused by Paul Volcker, and it was a good thing. I mean, because we had inflation that was about to destroy the country. So Volcker changed monetary policy and acted directly on the money supply instead of trying to adjust interest rates. And we threw the country into recession. There's no question about that. But it was a sharp, short recession. We killed inflation. Reagan didn't. This is not the question. Reagan did exactly the right thing. He put in place a huge supply side stimulus so that the recovery from that recession was quick and substantial.
But Reagan, just two little points. Reagan hung tough in '82 in a very tough political environment, very admirably, stayed the course. He could have thrown in the towel. He thought it would end up working. He supported Volcker. I'm not sure Trump will have that kind of gumption if it comes to it. It may not come to it. But look, we'll know an answer to your question, which is a very good one.
right.
In 2 weeks, the president will speak to Congress. What is that, on Tuesday the 28th, so 12 days from now? There'll be an OMB budget, which will be not quite as full as the normal budgets, but a serious budget. I mean, they got to submit a real budget. There'll also be a CR going forward. And then, so we'll know what Trump thinks he's going to do or not do about Medicare. One of the things that depresses me as a Republican who very much admires Paul Ryan leading the party at some risk towards entitlement reform and surviving it. You know, Dodge kept holding the House while passing budgets that had entitlement reform in it. One of the things that depresses me is that Trump might mark the moment where the Republicans walk back from what was an unusually, I would say, courageous and principled thing for a political party to do. And if that happens, maybe Vin's right and sort of Trump exceeds to Ryan, but I'm not so confident about that. But we'll know pretty soon, actually, I think, at least in the first iteration.
Let's try to move through a few more questions. We only have about 10.
I don't think it's the fault of the askers.
Yeah.
Just a guess.
Let's remember that. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Ryan. I'm a third year in the college. My question is mostly intended for you, Mr. Crystal, because you touched on this. What do you think is the path forward for what was this bipartisan push for integrating the United States into the world economy with things like the TPP? And the future for that seemed pretty dim when Clinton came out against this in the presidential debate. And I mean, going against specific policies or particular provisions seems fine in that way, but it seemed like a principled stand by people on both sides of the aisle. And in the meantime, before maybe that comes back, is there going to be irreparable harm to America's place in the world economy?
I think not in terms of the economy. I just think it can't be. It's almost inconceivable to me that after 4 years of Trump, even let's say a quote successful Trump administration, by which I mean that he implements a fair number of his policies, we're still going to be in a globalized economy. We're still going to have huge trading partners. I do not believe we're going to be a protectionist country in 4 years. I just think the forces are too great economically and politically in that direction. Will we go further in that direction? No, probably not. Will we have in individual industries little kind of reverses and sort of targeted little protectionist things? Sure, that happens a lot. A little more of that than is good for the country, probably. I'm more worried about the sort of crony capitalism aspects of it and the presidential targeting of particular companies aspect of it, the kind of third worldism side of it, than the actual economic effects. So I don't think we're going to go back towards Smoot-Hawley in 1930. I'm more worried. On the economic stuff, I just think it's too strong. On the geopolitical side, I'm much more worried. I think there it's more fragile, and there you don't know when you hit a tipping point. The U.S. can retreat and retreat and retreat. We have a huge amount of accumulated, let's call it political capital, and just capital because we're a huge country and powerful in that respect. You just don't know when you're in this, the fifth step of retreat, and suddenly everyone decides, okay, we can't count on them anymore. We'll just get nuclear weapons as a check, or we'll accommodate to Russia, or we'll accommodate to China, and suddenly a world order starts to unravel. So I'm much more worried about the geopolitical side than the geoeconomic side, I think.
Thank you. Next question.
Hello. This question is for Congressman Kingston. Just what are the challenges for the Republican Party moving forward in working with a president who is consistently spewing really sexist and derogatory remarks, especially towards women?
Well, I think, again, the proof is going to be in the pudding. What has he done to empower people to start their own businesses and to go to school and capitalize on all the opportunities there are out in a free market society. So I think that if the economy's doing well, then he's going to say, B+ by his sharpest critics, maybe B-. But I think that's the number one thing. The number two thing is, as an employer, if you think about Donald Trump inheriting a lot of money, I don't know what it was, $50 million, $100 million, what would I have done? I would have taken that money, I would have sat on a charity board, and I would have just lived off the interest. Instead, he went in New York City during a very bleak time, invested, made money, made more money, did more investments, ran a very successful international company. Not flawless, but still very successful. And his closest advisors were women. He had many, many women who were running his businesses and made an enormous amount of money under him. And the reason why I know this is when he was being accused of all kinds of things that were very difficult, the women in his business were not the ones coming forward. So I think, father of two daughters, one of which marched in Washington, D.C., but I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for women under the Trump administration in the years.
Thank you.
Hi guys, thanks for coming. My name's Stowe. I'm a third year in the college. There was a op-ed written in the New York Times this morning entitled Advice for My Conservative Students, and it boiled down to the fact that conservatives on school campuses were calling themselves victims, and that the left really wasn't trying to suppress viewpoints, but rather just disagree with them. And it might have been in response to things of the Milo Yiannopoulos at Berkeley event and what we had yesterday with Corey Lewandowski here. My question is, how do conservative students find a podium or a mouthpiece at which to actually express views and try to find that future of the Republican Party, which is what we're supposed to be talking about, and that it lies in young people, and the fact that I don't think much was spoken of in terms of young people today. What can we do to better reach out to our peers?
Yeah, well, don't think of yourself as a victim. I mean, even if you are a victim, it's generally good. I mean,
No,
it's unhealthy.
It might be good marketing. I'm going to disagree.
It's unhealthy to think of yourself as a victim, and people who are genuine victims will be the first to say this. People who were oppressed in totalitarian regimes, you have to think of yourself as having agency, to use a sort of fancy term that's fashionable these days. And so I would go make your case. Chicago's a pretty free speech friendly environment, I think, and there's political correctness is a big problem. I think it helped Trump, actually, the reaction against it. Campuses, I've done my best in little ways to try to provide alternate ways of, going to get end running some of the professors, providing material online. I think the internet's a huge asset in this way. It's a mixed blessing in many ways. But the fact is, compared to when I was in school, you have huge access to many, many points of view and articles and books and videos and so forth that you didn't have when I was there. You were much more trapped kind of by your environment. So I think conservative students have, and it's great to be in a minority, sharpens your skills, it's more fun. Who wants to be part of some flabby big majority, that's my view. And furthermore, who wants to sort of be part of some huge majority? And then I always tell young people that, you want to learn stuff as you get older, right? And it'd be terrible just to have the same dumb views when you're 60 as you had when you were 20. So if you start off as a liberal, you can look forward to growing and changing.
Vin, do you think when in 10 years, Republicans who are in college now will say, I'm a Trump Republican, I'm a populist, or will they say, well, I was always kind of a Marco Rubio type Republican, and I wasn't really for Trump?
I don't know. When I was in college ages ago, it couldn't have been worse for Republicans. Vietnam War and civil rights, Watergate, and all those things. And, the main thing I would say is, yes, fight the battles on campus, do the best you can, but don't worry about it. As soon as you leave this and enter reality, the battlefield looks a lot better, and you'll start winning.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Yeah, it's been a fun 3 years.
This is, by the way, Bill said something important. This school has, despite whatever may have happened with Corey Lewandowski, this school has been very good on free speech issues.
Yeah, let me say this. I'm a little bit more radical than they are. I think you ought to push like crazy. I really do. I think that conservative students are oppressed in college campuses across the country. I think it's a scandal. I think the University of Chicago and what they're doing here tonight is a rarity. This is a sanctuary, if you will. It's great. Diversity isn't about skin color. It's not about race. It should be about all kinds of things, including philosophy. And I would dare, and by the way, son of a college professor and brother of one. I would not be here if it wasn't for University of Georgia paying my dad, and housing us and so forth. But I think it's horrible. David Horowitz, who's a conservative speaker, was once boycotted by students and protested because the math teacher gave students extra credit for protesting him. The math teacher. Now, I'd expect it from the social studies teacher. I would respect it. But I think you ought to push back. I really do. In Berkeley, as I understand it, there was one arrest. David Axelrod and I have become friends because we respect each other's right to debate. And we do lots of shows where I'm defending Trump and he's wrong on everything. The reality is, I don't think you should cower from it at all. Not that Billy's saying to cower, but I think you should push back. Because what would happen if the shoe was on the other foot? Be a totally different story.
All right, we have time for two more.
I wonder whether Trumpism is not characterized as nationalism versus globalism so much as a new kind of globalism, which could be called a system that makes the world safe for autocracy. And so mainly a shift from rule of law and true facts or true ideas to acts of arbitrary will, like calling anything that's said against you fake news, and also establishing patron-client crony capitalist networks. So the question then is that a system that Republicans should endorse or be gathered into complicity with? Well, let's just leave it at that.
No, I think that's a good point. It really picks up on what Vin said earlier. I mean, Putinism is not just Russian. Bannon is actually a very globalist guy.
Right,
He knows all these Italian, obscure Italian quasi-fascist philosophers from the 30s. I studied political philosophy and taught it for a while, and I myself have never read Tavola, whatever his name is, these second and third tier kind of Carl Schmittian types from the 20s and 30s. And Bannon speaks at international conferences, and they have Nigel Farage there at the Trump headquarters 2 days after the election, and he's in touch with Le Pen's people. I very much agree that it's an international fight, if you will, between, I would say, liberal democracy, the rule of law, et cetera, and some kind of, neo-authoritarian point of view that I'm very unsympathetic to.
And that system actually is the real Russian influence that people are looking for.
It's complicated, though. If you really get it, I agree with everything Bill just said. But it is kind of complicated, because if I understand Bannonism correctly, one of the things that they're concerned about is the decaying of the nation state. And I agree with that. I think that's a problem. I think that's a concern. Henry Kissinger has written about that. This is not all one side versus the other. It's a complicated set of issues as the country and the world changes.
I mean, you can be critical of the UN and the EU and other such things and not be where Bannon is. I think it's been a disservice, and among some liberals have framed it that way. Either you're sort of a unabashed and admirer of every international agreement that's ever been made, every international organization that exists, or you're some kind of nativist nationalist. Yeah, obviously, there are kinds of internationalism that are in between.
That's right.
Final question.
Hello there. My name is Jose Heredia. I'm a third year in the college, and I'd like to thank all of y'all for your time. I actually came in here as a skeptic, so I wanted to sort of open up and hear your thoughts on the Republican Party. And also, like Representative Kingston, I am from Georgia, so I'm proud of that, so I wanted to share that. But I kind of wanted to hear a little bit more, because I don't feel it was talked about enough, is sort of the outreach that the Republican Party needs to do to minority groups in this country. Because I did hear what Representative Kingston said about sort of how democratic policies may have not been working for minority people, but I feel like in conservative states, they've definitely had the opportunity to make those cases in cities, but that has not been truthful. We've maintained democratic strongholds in those cities. So I kind of want to wonder, what ways is the Republican Party really engaging in trying to bring a more diverse coalition within their party?
How about we go through every speaker here to close it out?
Ben, you want to?
Well, I'll start. First of all, I still believe the Republican Party needs to do that. I don't think they've done a very good job of that. I think that there's a powerful argument to be made based on the core principles of the Republican Party. And you don't need to look just in Atlanta or Minneapolis or Chicago for this. Look around the world. Poor people overall are benefited by free markets, unlimited government, and democracy. And our party stands for those things and ought to apply those things. Translating that into a message aimed specifically at those communities has been a challenge, and we haven't done enough of it politically. But I was the chairman of Jack Kemp's campaign for president in 1988. Bill's a great friend of Jack's. He's really the last guy in the Republican Party that made a serious attempt to try to craft a message and take it into the minority communities. That's what I think needs to happen. But I don't, unfortunately, it seems to me that often becomes equated in the public discussion with, are you ready to abandon your principles and say the things that the Democrats have said to minority communities to get their votes? That A is wrong, and B, it won't work.
Any final thoughts, Bill, on the future of the Republican Party?
I mean, I thought in the summer of 2015, there they were on the stage. You had two sons of immigrants, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. I guess Bobby Jindal, I guess his parents are immigrants too, from South Asia, from India, obviously. And I thought, this is different, this is good, and this is not the Scout Walker from a working class background in Wisconsin. It didn't. Jeb was kind of the old Republican Party, and I was right about that. He wouldn't win. It was time for a change. I didn't expect the change to be Trump. I think honestly, I don't know. I think we just have to plow ahead. If you look at Congress, though, there are good people in both the House and the Senate. I think Nikki Haley is the UN ambassador now. So. Some of this has to happen, but mostly it has to happen through successful governing, I think, again. And this is where Trump may, in this respect, I'm worried that there'll be a setback if Trump isn't successful. The good news is, someone mentioned the Watergate thing, I was thinking about this. Nixon blows up in '74. The Republicans get slaughtered in the '74 election. All these seats that couldn't be lost were lost, obviously. 6 years later, Reagan wins, the Republicans take the Senate. Things can change pretty quickly in politics, and a party's image can change much more quickly than people think.
That's exactly right.
Thanks to leadership.
But the president shapes the party. Not to put you on the spot to close, but today at his press conference, President Trump is having an interaction with April Ryan, who's African American, and he asked April Ryan, "Can you set up a meeting with the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus?" And he says something to the effect of, "You know them, right?" So this, as much as you have a Jack Kemp influence in the Republican Party and that instinct, you still have President Trump. He's the head of the party.
Well, let me say this about the CBC, though. It's to the left of the progressives. I mean, and never, they've never been in play for President Trump. They don't necessarily speak for all African Americans in the United States of America. If you look at what he did in Milwaukee, Hillary Clinton was on Nantucket at that time, and she was going back and forth from there to Hollywood fundraising while he was going to Detroit and Milwaukee, and he was challenging the African American voters. Betsy DeVos on the cabinet, Seema Verma in the cabinet, Kellyanne Conway, the first woman to ever run a political campaign, Elaine Chao in the cabinet, Ben Carson in the cabinet. I have personally been asked to send as many minority members, and I hate using the term because I think diversity is a better term, but to the transition team as possible. So he is sincere about reaching out. When he says, I am going to be the best friend of the African Americans, let's all face it, he isn't this smooth on a lot of his messaging. But the message, if you look at it, is not a bad one. He's saying, look where you are now. I want to be your best friend. I don't think that's a bad thing. And the pushback that he got from the left was incredible. To me, the left should have said, you know what, where the heck is Hillary? Why? What is her plan? Her plan is, it's election time. Every 4 years, we go to the inner city and we pass out some money to the political brokers, and we get the voter turnout that we want. I think that is a system that deserves challenging. And maybe this isn't the right guy to challenge it, but he's challenging it. And he ought to be, I think, from the left, from my standpoint, I would have said, yeah, Hillary, come on. This guy's kind of up in your ante. I'm thinking about it. Where are you from, Jose? Me too. Plum Nelly Road. What street? We may. I went to Clark. I went to Clark Central.
Cedar Shoals, wrong side of town.
A Jaguar. I was a Golden Gladiator. They always beat us in football.
It's reversed now. It's like 8 years now that Clark Central will be out.
You know what? We're making the gladiators great again.
This is Republican outreach.
Let me jump in here to say that while we have to bring tonight's conversation to a close, our conversation about these issues continues. I mentioned at the outset that on Monday the 27th, we will turn the tables and have a searching conversation about the future of the Democratic Party. Next week, we also have two special events. On Thursday night, the 23rd, a debate, an Intelligence Squared debate, Oxford style, with the motion, "The political establishment has failed America." That's at Mandel Hall at 7 o'clock next Thursday. The following day, Van Jones and S.E. Cupp will wade into many of these similar issues that have searched tonight. We wanted to take a deep dive into the many opinions inside the Republican Party, and I think all of you have given us a great window into that. Please join me in thanking Vin Weber, Bill Kristol, and Congressman Kingston for that. Thank you.